Everybody, Peter Diamandis here to talk about the world of supplements, in particular, a sequence of supplements that are coming out from Lifeforce. And full disclosure, I am a co-founder of Lifeforce along with Tony Robbins, and I'm not a practicing physician. What I do want to do is introduce you to the gentleman who has formulated the components that we're going to be learning about here in this product called Peak Healthspan, and that's Dr. Hector Lopez. Hector, good to see you.
Hey, how are you, Peter? Good to be here.
Yeah, let me take a second and properly introduce you. Dr. Hector Lopez has been a practicing clinical physician, has really been focusing his time on the development of new nutraceuticals, new ingredients, and really the safety of these nutraceuticals. He is the head scientific and innovation advisor for Lifeforce. Historically and actively, he is chief medical officer and co-founder of the Center for Applied Health Sciences, and also the chief medical officer and co-founder of the Supplement Safety Solutions organization that really handles the post-market safety and surveillance of 60 different brands worth of scientific dietary safety products. And he's been also a developer of a wide variety of supplement ingredients for 15 to 20 years. Someone who knows this world extremely well. Hector, a pleasure to dive into a product, Peak Healthspan today, that is something that Tony and I use, that you formulated, and it's got a large number of ingredients, and I've sort of think of you as the orchestra conductor putting these ingredients together for a very specific set of reasons, really for maximizing health span and vitality. And I want to go into it in detail so folks who are considering using Peak Healthspan or are using it understand why each ingredient is in there and what they can expect from them. If you don't mind, we have a lot to cover in this video. So stay tuned. We're going to be not just skating on the surface, we're going to be diving deeper into all of this. Let's jump in. The floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, Peter. So I think just a little backdrop on the genesis of Peak Healthspan. The founders of Lifeforce sort of tasked me with if we could put together a product that really addressed many of the known targets in the geroscience or geroprotective field at the moment, based on the current state of science. Of course, always taking causing no harm or safety first, and with some ingredients that have very impressive or promising preclinical data and maybe some early human clinical data as well. Always still more work to be done, especially in this area. Health span, lifespan, the area of geroscience and longevity is a very dynamic field. It's there's so much work still left to be done, but so much work is being done on a daily basis and on a continuous basis. So, based on the current best available totality of the science that's available, I think we managed to put together a product that is a comprehensive sort of peak vitality, pro longevity, healthy aging, and health span support product. One of the main things that we wanted to do was make sure that we were at least either directly or indirectly targeting all 9 of the major hallmarks of aging to really be able to support cellular resilience, cell integrity, and multi-organ system function. The 9 hallmarks of aging, of course, is born out of that seminal work from the Lopez-Otin paper in 2013 that a lot of the geroscience fields uses as a great guardrail and for guideposts whenever looking at interventions, whether that's in pharma or in our case in Nutra or Nutraceuticals.
And we'll get into the details of what the 9 hallmarks of aging is. And I just want to point out that the book that Tony and I wrote, Lifeforce, follows on some of the work that David Sinclair did in his book Lifespan. Here's that book, and it's clear that we're entering a very different day and age where the concept of extending the healthy human lifespan is no longer controversial. It's really, how do we maximize your health and your vitality that allows you to live long enough to intercept all the other breakthroughs that are coming our way. So when I think about health span, how do you remain healthy, which means you've got the cognition, you're thinking clearly, you've got the aesthetics, you're looking good, the mobility, you're moving well as you're aging. So what I'd love to do is, we have a lot of products in this. This is not something where you're just taking one single product, but it's a sort of orchestration of this. And I want to run through these with you, Hector. What is each component and why did you put it in there?
Yeah, sure. So we can start right at the top on the upper right-hand corner, the supplement facts panel. We have vitamin D in there, and vitamin D might seem like it's not a very quote unquote sexy ingredient. It's not as, it's not novel, certainly. But one of the things we do know is, in addition to the bevy of data that has exploded on the impact of vitamin D on, for example, over 1,500 known genes, it can differentially change the way that 1,500 genes are expressed, whether that be upregulated or downregulated. There's certainly huge associations with vitamin D and just affecting just about every organ system, from the brain to the immune system to cardiovascular, to metabolic health, to musculoskeletal health, and everything in between. And there's even some data showing that vitamin D itself has been able to impact the epigenetic clock. And some of the work that's been done by Dr. Steve Horvath and Morgan Levine, when they look at patterns in the methylation of DNA, or the DNA methylome, creating those algorithms for with the epigenetic clock. So it's in there as one of those sort of workhorse ingredients that we feel, if you were only taking one product almost as a multivitamin for targeting the biology of aging, I feel like, if you're on a deserted island and you want to target the biology of aging, you should find a way to get some extra vitamin D, and we have it in there at a dose that's about equivalent to 1,500 IU or so. We also have an additional vitamin D and K product, of course, under Lifeforce. We also have niacin equivalents here. And what I'd like to point out is that this is a little different from your NR or NMN precursors, is that we actually are using just straight niacinamide and niacin in a blend here to get us to about 130 milligrams, which is the equivalent of, the molar equivalent of, about 300 to 400 milligrams of NR or NMN in terms of the amount of precursor that you're providing for the body to then be able to make its own NAD. And again, this is meant as a companion product, right? It's going to be a companion product to the next product we'll be reviewing together, which is Peak NMN. We have B12 methylcobalamin in here, along with, I'll also point out, betaine, which is over here, the beta power version of betaine anhydrous, and the methylcobalamin. The reason we have both of these in here is because one of the things that the body does in the biochemistry of handling NAD metabolism by providing it precursors is it does provide a little bit of a methyl burden to the body. The body has to utilize methyl groups in order to metabolize and handle niacinamide, niacin, even NMN and NR, take your precursor of choice. So we didn't want to leave anything up to chance. There has been some data showing that homocysteine levels may go up slightly. It's not been shown in every study, but there's a couple of small scale studies where that's been shown. So we wanted to make sure that if you have one product where you're increasing someone's NAD status, that you'd be able to do it in a way that also doesn't tax your methyl group metabolism or methylation burden, especially because so many people have MTHFR, SNP in terms of folate metabolism, and they really need to be able to keep their methyl metabolism and methylation status on par.
Hector, what's the difference between the four products above that dark line and below?
Oh yeah, that's just it's a labeling, regulatory labeling requirement. The products above the bold line are products which have an established DV or percentage daily value. So if you notice, you'll see that everything below that bold line doesn't have an actual daily value. Everything above it does. So these are micronutrients, usually micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals that already have an established daily value.
Great.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah. So really, the product here, Peak Healthspan, it's anchored or really driven by, I guess, the hero ingredient here, if you will, is the NAD3 ingredient, which was born out of one of the companies that I co-founded. My co-founders and I, we co-founded this company to be able to basically target the molecular signatures and the hallmarks of aging, and try to amplify the healthy biochemical and molecular signatures of health promoting activities. So success leaves clues, and we do know that many of these health promoting activities, such as calorie restriction, exercise, deep restful restorative sleep, stress management, healthy relationships, a lot of the things that you see in common with the blue zones, for example, a lot of these health promoting activities carry with them biochemical and molecular signatures. So they're instigating the cells and the organs in our body to create and respond and adapt in a certain way. So we wanted to be able to create a product that, there's no exercise in a pill, claim here. There's no lifespan promoting product in a pill in isolation. We're trying to just amplify what we know people are already trying to do to enhance lifespan and health span.
Let me take a second
Yep.
And digress here for folks. NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, people can think of as sort of an energy currency in the body that helps the epigenome, helps the right gene stay on and the right gene stay off, and helps DNA repair. We're going to be talking about later NAD precursors like NMN. But one of the things I remember learning about was that our NAD levels fall over time. Our intracellular, mitochondrial NAD levels, and that's like the energy supply to allow your genes to be properly regulated and properly repaired. So really helping to boost those levels are critically important. The other thing to point out, NAD3 is a brand name, right? It's not a new form of NAD. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Okay, yeah, so one of the things our team set out to do in developing NAD3 was making sure that we were addressing, of course, not only trying to target lifespan, but other aspects of the biology of aging in order to improve health span along with lifespan, which usually, but not always, goes hand in hand. The other thing we wanted to make sure we did was, of course, behavior change is still primary. It's still ideal. It's still something that is the bedrock of anything that we do. And really what we set out to do was find a potent cocktail of naturally occurring bioactive compounds and ingredients or molecules that are naturally occurring in order to amplify that molecular profile or the gene expression signature that we talked about before, that's associated with all those critical pillars of longevity, and health span promoting activities. And so here we have the 9 hallmarks of aging that we talked about or briefly mentioned at the outset when we started talking about Peak Healthspan as a product. It really sets up a really nice framework for a lot of the intervention in the geroscience, geroprotective interventions field, whether it be pharmaceuticals, biologics, procedures, and in our case, of course, finding nutraceuticals or naturally occurring bioactive compounds. And what we set out to do is not only address one specific hallmark here, because so many of these hallmarks are cross-talking and they're interacting. It is true that if you impact one, for example, if you impact epigenetic drift or the problems with epigenetic alterations, and if you improve someone's epigenetic clock or epigenetic age and their methylation pattern, you might end up impacting something like one of the other hallmarks like genomic instability.
You know, Hector, I'd love, just because this has been widely accepted by the whole geroscience community as sort of the full range of things you need to do if you want to extend health span and lifespan. I think it'd be worthwhile, not too much, but to spend a minute or 30 seconds per, and just so folks understand the range of things that are causing what we believe aging, why aging occurs. Do you mind just like run around the circle here and spend 15 to 30 seconds each?
Yeah, sure. We can start here, this blue hallmark of genomic instability. So genomic instability essentially refers to DNA damage, whether that be SNPs or mutations that may occur over time, something that causes an inherent somatic mutation to DNA. DNA damage also does other things where it really creates a big burden on the cell, a cell that has DNA damage, and this is occurring on every cell in our body many times per day, and we have DNA repair mechanisms in place. If those DNA repair mechanisms fall short or they get distracted, for example, over time because there's so much damage, they get overwhelmed, then that can clearly create cell dysfunction, tissue dysfunction, organ and organismal dysfunction.
Next one.
Yeah, telomere attrition. So the telomeres are essentially those analogous to the aglets of shoelaces that make sure they keep your shoelaces from unraveling and falling apart. The telomeres are the end caps found at the end of chromosomes in order to keep a lot of that DNA that has been very elegantly packaged to make sure that that DNA that's wrapped around histones and creating these intricate structures stay in place. With every cell division, there tends to be a little bit of a hit on the telomere. And so you have mechanisms in place to replace that telomere. It's an enzyme called telomerase. But you can also do other things by stabilizing the complex of proteins that sort of keep the cap protected. So that's another way to keep telomeres stable. The next one, epigenetic alterations. This is obviously something that Dr. Sinclair talks about a lot in his book and in a lot of his work. So epigenetics refers to really anything that is heritable that is outside epi or above the genome, the actual DNA, genome itself. However, most people in the geroscience field, when they refer to epigenetics, are referring to these chemical modifications to the DNA, such as methylation or methyl groups, or acetylation or acetyl groups.
I think about it. I think about it as the epigenome is helping individual cells determine what genes they should keep on and what genes they should turn off, right? And it's if your cell is a skin cell versus a liver cell, skin cell genes should be on and liver cell genes should be off. And epigenome is sort of like the, like you said, from the Greek word above, epi, making sure that the genome for that cell is right genes on, right genes off. What's next?
Yep. So yeah, and then of course those chemical groups affect that which genes are turned on or off. Loss of proteostasis. This is basically just making sure that proteins, which often have three-dimensional structures or sometimes multiple subunits, that they stay together and do not unfold or lose their integrity or denature. There are many age-related diseases that are associated with proteins that end up forming aggregates or building up inside cells, usually as a result of insufficient autophagy.
And autophagy means what?
Autophagy, auto, self, phagy, eating. It's the process of basically like the house cleaning function of cell being able to clean up any damaged proteins or damaged molecules. Deregulated nutrient sensing, the next one down here. This basically refers to your ability to handle and maintain a balance between the nutrients that are consumed and how you're able to expend that energy or utilize those nutrients to make other molecules. We have sensors that help in our cells that basically help to tell our DNA, and they also help to tell other enzymes in the cell what our energy status is. Are we in a sort of high energy state or low energy state? So some of these sensors, molecular sensors, you've probably, your listeners have heard of, include mTOR, AMPK, things like NRF or NRF2 as well. Sirtuins can also play a role in nutrient sensing.
Cool.
Mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria, of course, the basic high school definition of the energy sort of powerhouses of the cell is a very simplistic sort of definition. We know now that mitochondria are doing so much more. They're actually really more like signaling organelles, really that do more than just help provide ATP and transform sort of chemical energy into kinetic energy and energy for driving chemical reactions. But mitochondria are also involved in maintaining healthy antioxidant or redox balance, so the amount of oxidants versus antioxidants in our cell. And they also help to signal to the cell if the cell should engage in apoptosis, basically programmed cell death, or if the cell is healthy enough to continue to engage in its current functions. Cell senescence, the next one here. So senescence are sort of like this unique zombie-like state that cells can attain. It's almost like a state of suspended animation where the cell is no longer capable of dividing because it's received damage in some way, shape, or form. For example, it may have gotten DNA damage in that first hallmark we talked about, genomic instability. There may be some epigenomic or epigenetic issues. And that cell is essentially been rendered incapable of either killing itself or replicating itself normally. And so it does play a function with tissue repair, for example, injury repair. So I don't want to say all cellular senescence is bad, but when it clearly overwhelms or outweighs the healthy cells, it can get to a point where it releases this inflammatory milieu, almost like this toxic sort of SASP, we call it, the secretome, senescence-associated secretory phenotype. It's basically all these compounds and inflammatory mediators that it can release, and then it can convert other cells. That's why we call it a zombie cell. It can turn other cells that are normal into senescent cells, which is why we want to make sure that our ability to detect senescent cells by our immune system is intact, so we can make sure we keep that under control. Stem cell exhaustion. So just about every organ and tissue in the body has an ability to self-renew. and that's usually because there's a niche of pluripotent stem cells or multipotent stem cells that allow that cell, which may be immature, to provide a reservoir for continued cells within that tissue or that organ. There are also other more multipotent cells that can be released into the blood, for example, that can then be converted into other cell types throughout the body in order to replenish cells that are damaged or otherwise lost. And then finally, the last one here, altered intercellular communication. So this is basically the ability for cells to talk to each other in what we call an autocrine, paracrine, or endocrine manner. So hormones, I would think of in this hallmark, think of hormones and cytokines, which are chemical messengers, basically, that allow cells to communicate to each other and engage in unique cell functions. So I think
Beautiful.
we wrapped them all up.
Thank you.
So basically, what we did with NAD3, which is anchoring this Peak Healthspan product, is we really wanted to go beyond NAD. And even though it's called NAD3, to your point, as a brand name, it really is 3 ingredients that are doing so much more. And the bioactive ingredients, and not just Peak Healthspan, but when we combine it, it really makes a great 1-2 punch with Peak NMN, which we'll be reviewing later. It really targets many of the other key pillars of aging. Again, some of these, we don't have to go into detail. These are known as transcription factors like PGC1 alpha, FOXO, SIRT1, a multiple of them. There's 7 human sirtuin genes. We know that we can impact and influence multiple sirtuin genes with all the ingredients that we've included in Peak Healthspan, including NAD3. We know we can impact telomere stability. We know we can impact mitochondrial health. We can impact stem cell niche health and intercellular communication. So again, inflammation, all the things we talked about before in the previous slide, we can impact with the ingredients in Peak Healthspan. Here, I'll just bring your attention to this aspect here. This is some cellular data that we had initially.
Looking at the third chart there, right, on
Yes,
the right-hand side.
On the right-hand side, this third chart, you could see that NAD3 statistically significantly increased the amount of NAMPT, and we're not showing this here, but it also increased the amount of NMNAT, and those are important enzymes that the body uses to make its own NAD. So what we're doing here is basically saying that NAD3 can sort of prime you to make more of your own NAD as long as you've got enough raw material or a substrate or building blocks in place, right? And here, basically, what we're saying is we've got data behind supporting NAD3 at all these levels. We call it a canonical sequence. It's all these levels from the DNA methylome or epigenetic influence we talked about before to the transcriptome, which basically just means which genes are being turned on and turned off, to the proteome, which basically just means which genes are being translated into proteins, and then macro level responses, which we've published on NAD3 showing, hey, not only are we impacting all these things on a molecular level, but we're also impacting things that matter on a clinical level, right? So cardiovascular, cardiometabolic risk factors like total cholesterol, ApoB driven LDL and VLDL molecules, triglycerides, et cetera. So, and then we come back to the full formulation of Peak Healthspan.
And if you don't mind, again, we covered obviously above NAD3, those NAD3 plus 4 components above. Are there a few other components that you put in this orchestration that you want to point out?
Yeah, so we covered NAD3 here below. We covered beta power betaine. This one here is very interesting. It's called Smart Prime OM or Omega Complex. This is a combination of 2 ingredients, a sesame seed extract which is standardized for unique lignins, phytolignins we call them, and a methyl and sulfur donor called methylsulfonylmethane that's often used in the joint health space. And that combination was shown, this was actually uncovered through the use of our Fountainhead AI, artificial intelligence engine, which allows us to take database of unique structured data along with unstructured data that's proprietary to us, and allows us to make unconventional, non-obvious connections. This was one that was really interesting because what it does is it increases your body's own enzymatic machinery to improve your omega-3 index, even if you don't change your background consumption of omega-3. So it's also helping to put it in the right phospholipid matrix, because when you take in these omega-3s from fish oil like EPA or DHA, or you consume fish, or you consume flaxseed or some plant-based omega-3 or algae, your body needs to package it in a phospholipid. And so Smart Prime was shown to improve the amount of phosphatidylcholine packaged DHA, for example. That's the one that gets delivered through the blood-brain barrier to the brain. The predominant amount of omega-3 that makes up the brain is DHA. And improving your omega-3 index has been shown to improve all-cause mortality, morbidity from multiple diseases, particularly cardiovascular disease. So we felt it plays an important role here in addressing cardiovascular health, specifically for a Healthspan product. The next one we have here, rhodiola rosea, standardized for rosivids and salidrosides. This listeners might see this and say, isn't this an adaptogen that's used to, for example, enhance energy and decrease fatigue during stressful states as an adaptogen? And it is, but it also, so the active compounds have also been shown to impact autophagy themselves and improve lifespan of certain model organisms like fruit flies and C. elegans, for example, especially when it's combined with calorie restriction. So this ingredient is one of those things that you take it and you feel it as well. So it's part of the reason why some people say this is not just a longevity multivitamin, because they feel something, right? If you take Peak Healthspan, it's one of those experiential things. It's the longevity product you can feel, the Healthspan product you can feel. This is part of the reason why, because it does increase energy. CertMax is almost a ginger family extract. The black turmeric is what it's known as. And it's actually been shown to increase sirtuin in certain in vitro and animal model systems to a greater degree than resveratrol. So this Campharia parviflora root extract was really impressive because it increases SIRT1 to a large degree, which is, again, one of those impactful pro-resilient pro-healthspan genes and pro-longevity genes we talked about. Luteolin and fisetin, the next two, those are two phytoflavonoids that have been associated with having senolytic function and cellular protective, cytoprotective function. So remember, we talked about cellular senescence obviously being one of those major hallmarks. And this is one way we're able to target or address that, is with the luteolin fisetin combination, which have both independently been shown in various studies to have senolytic function. There's multiple human clinical trials going on that's sponsored by Dr. Kirkland and others at the Mayo Clinic currently on fisetin. They use a different approach. They use a hit and run approach with a much higher dose, dosed intermittently. Here what we did is we decided to use a much lower dose. When you average it out over the course of the month, you're getting about the same total dose that you would otherwise use in a hit and run fashion. There are also other benefits to fisetin as well as improving the glutathione status and antioxidant.
And if someone is taking fisetin right now in their additional supplements, should they stop taking it if they're taking the Peak Healthspan? Is there a concern?
No, there wouldn't be concern. We're using a much lower dose than what would be considered like tolerable upper limit. So yeah, there wouldn't be harm expected or anticipated there.
Great.
Yep. Last couple here, rounding out the bevy of HealthSpan bioactives is apigenin. Apigenin is interesting. It's actually known as a phytoprogestin, actually. We extract it here from celery. It's also found in things like chamomile and a couple of other herbals or botanicals. What's interesting about apigenin is it can potentially prevent the degradation or the excess consumption of NAD. So once you've made NAD, one thing is making enough NAD. The other thing is keeping it. And part of the challenge as we age is the enzymes that degrade and consume and deplete NAD do go up over time. One of those is called CD38. And so it's an NADase. It's an enzyme that breaks down NAD. And so apigenin has been shown, at least in preclinical models, to have the potential to do that. It also has some other benefits in and of itself. It's neuroprotective. It can promote healthy estrogen metabolism for both men and women. And so that's why apigenin is in there. PQQ, pyrroloquinoline quinone, is a mitochondrial enhancing ingredient. It has been shown in animal models to improve mitochondrial biogenesis. And then in humans, it's actually been shown to improve cognitive function when dosed on a regular basis, on a daily basis as well. So it's we're pulling on multiple vectors, multiple levers here. The last ingredient is ergothioneine. Ergothioneine is also one of those kind of fascinating molecules. It's known as a thione or a thione-containing amino acid-like compound. So basically, it's like an amino acid that contains a sulfur group. And that makes it a very powerful antioxidant in and of itself. But we don't really want to just be incorporating antioxidants at large doses. It's used here at a large dose mostly for its potential benefit in protecting DNA, cell membranes, mitochondria, and it has a very strong association in population-based studies. When people look at the dietary consumption of ergothioneine, it's been associated with longer lifespan and longevity, decreased all-cause mortality, mortality from non-cardiovascular, cardiovascular causes as well. So there's a specific receptor transporter in the gut and at most cells called OCTN. It's a transporter that's specific to that ergothioneine uses to be able to get in and into cells. So we can accumulate it, but we can't make it. We can only consume it from certain plants, and things like mushrooms, organ meats, broccoli are a little more rich in ergothioneine. So that rounds out a pretty deep dive on HealthSpan.
That's extraordinary. So, and again, the recommended serving size here and all of the daily values are built around 3 capsules. How do you suggest people dose themselves with this? Should they experiment with 1 or start at 3?
Yeah, I would actually, on this one, because there's less of an activating, stimulating component like Peak Rise, this one I would probably just start at 2 and then decide if you want to go 2 to 3. I think it's very rare are you going to have people, very rarely would you have someone need to start at 1 or need to go back down to 1.
And is this done at the start of the day, with food at lunch? When do you recommend it?
Yeah, this one we'd recommend midday, actually. It's a good diet. So you do Peak Rise in the morning, and then midday you can do a Peak Healthspan. And it might even give you, because of the rhodiola, it could also give you that little bit of a midday lift to prevent the mid-afternoon slump that some people feel.
All right, so let's summarize here. With Peak Healthspan, we're working on, you formulated this to combat the 9 hallmarks of aging, but you're if you would, your top 3 takeaways someone should take Peak Healthspan for. What are the sort of the top reasons here?
Yeah, so again, number one, if you're looking for something to address all 9 hallmarks of aging safely and effectively, where there's a combination of human and preclinical data and multiple models, optimizing cellular longevity, cellular resilience against some of the environmental factors that sort of conspire to create and accumulate damage over time. And then if you want to encourage a little bit of additional energy as an adaptogen for youthful cellular energy metabolism, there's a couple things here that also help with that aspect.
Fantastic. Dr. Hector Lopez, thank you so much. Thank you for the formulations here. A pleasure, Hector. Thank you for your time and your brilliance.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.